I still can't explain what happened that summer of 1962. Some nights I lie awake, trying to convince myself it was all a fever dream, but the scars tell a different story. I was only 17, living with my family in a broken-down shack near the edge of the Badlands in South Dakota. We didn't have much, just enough to scrape by. My parents worked from dawn till dusk, leaving me to help in any way I could. That July was hotter than I could remember, the kind of heat that dries your throat and makes you curse the sun. It was my mother who sent me out that morning. "James, we're running low," she said, pressing a cracked jug into my hands. She didn't need to say more. I knew the drill, 12 miles to the nearest creek, with a chance of spotting game along the way. I slung my father's old hunting knife onto my belt and set out with the jug and a small sack, hoping to find something edible to bring back. The land stretched wide and empty, endless miles of cracked earth and sparse trees. By noon, my legs ached and sweat poured down my face. I filled the jug at the creek and sat for a while, trying to catch my breath. There was no sign of anything worth hunting. Even the birds seemed to have disappeared, leaving the world strangely silent. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange, I decided to head back. The quiet followed me, unnerving in a way I couldn't put into words. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my hand resting on the knife, though I didn't know what I expected to find. The air felt different, heavier, like it was pressing down on me. Then it happened. A searing pain tore through my lower back, and I gasped, dropping to my knees. I reached back and felt something sharp, like a jagged piece of bone or claw, embedded in my flesh. Before I could turn, something struck me hard across the face. Stars exploded in my vision, and the world spun. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of heavy breathing and a low, guttural growl. When I woke up, I couldn't move. My body felt like it was filled with lead, my limbs refusing to obey me. I was being dragged, my back scraping against uneven ground. The air was cold now, biting against my sweat-soaked skin. I opened my eyes, but everything was blurry, shapes twisting and merging in the darkness. The thing pulling me was massive, its shadowy form hunched and unnatural. I tried to cry out, but my throat was dry and no sound came. The dragging stopped. I heard the crackling of a fire and smelled something that made my stomach turn. Rot, decay, the unmistakable stench of death. I was tossed to the ground like a rag doll, landing near the edge of the firelight. For a moment I thought I was alone, but then I saw them, shapes scattered around the cave. Bodies, torn, broken, and stripped of humanity. I wanted to scream, but terror gripped me, freezing my voice. And then I saw it, the creature. It stepped into the light, towering over me. Its body was human-like but stretched unnaturally, its limbs too long, and its face a twisted mockery of a man's. Its eyes glowed faintly, like dying embers, and its mouth was filled with jagged, yellow teeth. Black claws extended from its fingers, glistening in the firelight. It crouched near me, sniffing the air, its gaze locking onto mine. I was certain I was about to die. The creature let out a sound, low and guttural, like a mix between a growl and a laugh. It didn't kill me, not then. Instead, it turned its attention to something deeper in the cave. For the first time, I noticed another figure, a second creature, slightly smaller but just as horrifying. The two seemed to argue, their growls and screeches filling the cavern. I used the distraction to try moving my fingers, then my arms. Slowly, painfully, I regained some control of my body. The argument turned violent. The larger creature lunged at the smaller one, their clash shaking the ground. Bones snapped, claws tore through flesh, and the air filled with their unholy roars. The smaller creature fell, its body convulsing before going still. The victor was wounded, black ichor dripping from gashes across its chest. It staggered, thrashing in pain, its eyes glowing brighter. I didn't move. I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, my heart pounding as I waited for whatever came next. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across the cave walls. Every second felt like an eternity, and I prayed for dawn, for some glimmer of hope in the darkness. The fire burned low, its embers glowing faintly in the suffocating darkness of the cave. I stayed still, my breath shallow, afraid that even the smallest sound might draw the creature's attention back to me. The larger one, now victorious, writhed in pain near the remains of its defeated rival. Its low, guttural moans echoed in the cavern, a sound that sent chills through my already frozen body. As I regained more control over my limbs, I dared to shift slightly, wincing as sharp pain flared from the wound in my back. My fingers brushed the jagged claw still embedded in my flesh. I bit down on my lip to keep from crying out, my teeth digging into the skin so hard I tasted blood. Slowly I began inching away from the fire, keeping my movements deliberate and silent. The creature's thrashing slowed, its glowing eyes dimming. I prayed it would succumb to its wounds, but luck wasn't on my side. Its head snapped toward me, its ember-like gaze locking onto mine. My heart stopped. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then it let out a guttural snarl and started crawling toward me, dragging its broken body with unnatural strength. I scrambled backward, my hands slipping on the slick, bloodied ground. My back hit the wall of the cavern, and I realized there was nowhere left to go. The creature loomed over me, its breath hot and rancid. I reached for the hunting knife on my belt, my fingers fumbling desperately. As its claws came down, I swung blindly, the blade sinking into its shoulder. It recoiled, letting out an ear-splitting screech that echoed like a banshee's wail. I didn't wait to see if I had done real damage. Adrenaline surged through me, giving strength to my shaking legs. I bolted, weaving around the bodies that littered the cave floor. The light of the fire grew dimmer as I stumbled deeper into the darkness, the walls closing in around me. My lungs burned with every breath, but I kept going, driven by sheer terror. Behind me, the creature's snarls grew louder. It was following, its heavy footfalls closing the distance. I tripped, falling hard onto the rocky ground. Pain exploded in my knee, but I forced myself up, using the jagged wall for support. The tunnel narrowed further, forcing me to crawl. My hands scraped against the rough stone, and my wounded back ached with every movement. The snarls grew fainter. For a moment, I thought I had lost it. Then ahead of me, a faint glimmer of light appeared. My heart leapt. I clawed my way forward, ignoring the searing pain in my body. The light grew brighter, the promise of freedom pulling me like a lifeline. I emerged from the tunnel into the open air, the cool breeze washing over me like a blessing. But the nightmare wasn't over. The creature burst from the tunnel behind me, its wounded form even more horrifying in the pale light of dawn. Its eyes burned with rage and its claws raked the ground as it lunged toward me. Desperation took over. I grabbed a large rock and hurled it with all my strength. It struck the creature in the face, momentarily stunning it. I didn't wait to see if it would recover. I ran, the uneven terrain of the Badlands tearing at my bare feet. Rivers, rocky outcrops, and thorny bushes became obstacles I barely noticed in my frenzy to escape. The creature's snarls faded with distance, but I didn't dare slow down. By the time I stumbled onto a dirt road, my body was battered and broken, my vision blurry from exhaustion and blood loss. I collapsed, my face hitting the warm dirt. The last thing I remember was the distant rumble of an engine and the sound of someone shouting. When I woke, I was in a hospital bed, the bright light stinging my eyes. My body was wrapped in bandages and the pain was a constant dull throb. A nurse hovered nearby, her expression a mix of shock and relief. "You're lucky to be alive," she said softly. "They found you miles from anywhere." I wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't find the words. How could I explain what I had seen without sounding insane? Instead, I mumbled something about getting lost and injured by a falling log. The lie felt hollow, but it was better than the truth. Who would believe me anyway? Days turned into weeks, and I recovered slowly. My family never pressed me for details, though I could see the worry in their eyes. They must have sensed that whatever happened had changed me. I tried to move on, to forget, but the nightmares wouldn't let me. Every night I saw its eyes, its claws, the mangled bodies in the cave. A year later, a man visited me, a Lakota elder named Maddo. He introduced himself with a quiet dignity, his presence commanding respect. "I heard about your ordeal," he said. His words were calm, but his eyes held a depth of understanding that unnerved me. "You encountered a Wechuge." He explained what the creature was, a man-eating being from their ancient stories, something neither fully human nor beast. They prey on the weak, the lost, he said, but they are intelligent, cunning. You are fortunate to have survived. I listened in silence, his words both a confirmation and a curse. I never returned to the Badlands after that day. Some things I learned are better left forgotten. But even now I can't escape the memories, the glowing eyes, the stench of death, and the claw marks that will forever remind me of the horrors lurking in the wilderness.